So welcome to our next session, which is using elements of gamification to engage learners in executive education. And we're joined by Newcastle University Business School, and in particular, Michelle Barr and Dr. Nicola Patterson, who will be taking us through their presentation. But before we do, just a reminder that if you're looking for alumni online engagement, that's with Central European University, Budapest and Vienna, please scroll to the top of the agenda and click track 2 or click track 3 to check out the Tech Lab with ClassLink. But now over to you, Michelle and Nicola. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to this presentation. And don't forget, everybody, questions in the chat bar or the Q&A bar, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lynn. And just to say welcome to everyone. And as Lynn said, our presentation is using elements of gamification to engage learners in executive education. My name's Nicola, and I'm an academic at Newcastle University Business School. And I'm joined by my colleague, Michelle Barr, a learning technologist, part of the Central University team, the Learning, Teaching and Development Service. And we're each throughout the presentation going to give our perspective so that you've got that dual academic and learning technology perspective and how we work together on the project. What we'll talk about in the presentation is we'll just give you a project context and overview before then going on to talk through the design process and intent, what we understood and how we applied gamification in the program, and what this looks like at the macro strategic pedagogical approach, and the meso in terms of the elements of gamification, and that micro level of operationalization within the program, and then share some of the outcomes from the project. So to just give you a flavour of the project context and how we arrived at working in this space, the academic ambition for the project was to design and develop a suite of work-based, part-time, blended learning, postgraduate programmes for executive education learners, which really spoke to and engaged the regional market in the north of England, but particularly the northeast, where Newcastle University is based. And the three programs that we were designing, and I have to say that this process started pre-COVID-19, so it was pre-pandemic. The three programs were strategic leadership in MSc, an executive MBA, and a coaching and mentoring MSc. All three programs are post-experience programs, so it's a requirement that all learners that come on the program have experience, industry work-based experience. And to give you a flavour of the demographic of our learners, they have an average age of about 41 and an average work-based experience of about 17 years. The cohorts on these particular programs are small, so we have about 20 to 30 in each cohort. That's not to say that the gamification elements, they are completely transferable, and we have used them on larger cohorts in the past. But the key to this particular project was the way that we did this and the way that we worked. So we took a cross-program perspective, so the academic teams worked across the three different programs collaboratively with the Learning, Teaching and Development Service. So working with Michelle as a learning technologist, we brought together that collaborative, equitable approach of working as an academic team with learning and technology experts, so that we created this unique combination which brought together technological, pedagogical and content knowledge. And that was really central to this project.
Thanks, Nicola. So yeah, I just want to firstly reiterate the point that Nicola's just made there about the collaborative approach to the projects, because I think that was really pivotal and key in our ability to be able to achieve what we have in terms of implementing gamification elements in the holistic design and development of the blended delivery. So I'm just going to take you through the bit of the design process. So the design process itself, which was over about a year and a half with the teams, involved lots of cross-program curriculum design conversations and facilitated workshops. And we really took a learner-centered approach and learner-centered methods to the design. There was considerable thought into what is appropriate for our learners, so what is appropriate for work-based learners, and lots of discussions around the pedagogical strategies and approaches, and which we're going to hopefully show you today from that macro, as Nicola was saying, meso and micro level. And through that process of the design, we were able to agree that what we wanted to offer as part of the portfolio was, of course, to be able to motivate and engage learners in that learning experience. We wanted to be able to integrate academic content with their work context in a seamless way throughout the learning journey. We wanted to offer an active but experiential learning experience. And more importantly, we wanted to offer a challenging and incremental experience for the learners. And we thought using elements of gamification would really help us to achieve that. And I just want to touch some of the technological and technical considerations that we took in the design phase. So we needed to understand how we were going to use the virtual learning environment in a way that supports and enhances the content, so that it's pedagogically driven. And again, that collaborative piece of knowledge that we brought together helped us to achieve that. But also, as well as going through the pandemic at the time, we also were changing to a completely new virtual learning environment, which again was a challenge for us in terms of upskilling. And how we achieved that is I ran lots of development workshops and upskilling in using the new virtual learning environment, but in also using some of the other educational technologies that we've embedded across the programs. So I just at this point want to define gamification for the programs. So gamification is an approach that uses game design concepts, but in a non-gaming online learning environment to support and encourage learning. So it's not game-based learning. We're not going to be showing you any simulations or serious games. The emphasis for us in using these elements is in progression and recognition, rather than leaderboards and badges, because that just wouldn't be right for our type of learners. So gamification for our programs is a concept that we've used to make learning more engaging, and we're going to hear that word throughout the presentation today, to increase motivation and to encourage more meaningful learning experiences. And some of the elements that we're going to talk you through today that we've used are designing tasks that support understanding of complex theories and topics, adopting a challenging and incremental weekly approach across all of our modules and programs. In that accomplishment piece, we're creating a sense of accomplishment through safe developmental cohorts, through encouraging those collaborative behaviours and activities in those cooperative behaviours, but more importantly, we're motivating and engaging learners in a progressive journey, so that leads to mastery and practice of topic and mastery and practice. So in a sense, the game aspect of it is that mastery of practice.
Thanks, Michelle. And I'm just going to share with you this macro level of the gamification elements that we're talking about in terms of the pedagogical strategy. So you'll see there the journey that we take the learners on, which has the content, the knowledge at the heart of what we do. But I'm just going to take you through the context first of all. And for us, it's really appreciating that the learners that we are focusing on are always situated in their context. They're always in an ocean of practice, and they're fully immersed in a very complex professional workplace context that is very important to their learning experience, to enable them to build insights into their particular context and others that are with them on that learning journey, so that they can relate to the content. So contextualizing learning through exploring, challenging and applying to real world practices is really important. The content, that knowledge piece, is extremely important in terms of we want to enable learners to be able to critically analyze frameworks, models and tools for decision making. We don't expect learners to swallow whole the content and the knowledge that we give them. We want them not to accept readily what we're talking about. We want them to critically analyze and challenge what we're talking about, so that they can develop that mastery of knowledge and skills situated within their practice, so that we can support the development of sustainable leaderful practice for evolving cultures, which impacts themselves, their organisations, and supports those global societal challenges. The final element in this macro level is process. So it's about, for us, creating a psychologically safe developmental cohort. So for us, the safe environment, it was particularly challenging as we shifted completely online because of the pandemic, but it was really important in the amount of time that we spent with learners to create that, because learners that are able to handle and deal with their vulnerabilities and don't feel scared learn in a much more deeper way. So we needed to create those social learning spaces and activities, which included the likes of action learning sets, to help them really make sense of their experiences that they're having within their context and how they're making sense of that content through reflection and that deeper level of reflexivity. The second element of gamification was that meso level. So we start and begin that journey with the learners by giving them this and providing them with this toolkit for reflection. And that's really important for our learners in terms of understanding the learning philosophy and getting the most out of this experience. And first of all, we need them to understand that they understand themselves so that they're able to relate to others. And once they're able to reflect and reflect upon themselves and understand others, they can reflect with others in relation to their and others' practices, so that they can become an active participant in what has become a reflective community. Then we move on to explore. And this is the first element of gamification, where we really introduce core content. And we can explore and develop the understandings of particular discipline areas, theories, and frameworks. So, and then take learners through this in relation to their practice. So how might this work? How could this, how can you apply this within your own work-based context? And explore the possibilities to develop personal and organizational practices from this new knowledge that they've explored. The next element is challenge, and this is where we really start to get learners to challenge their personal attitudes, their thoughts, feelings, and behaviours, question and perhaps start challenging practices in their own organisation through theory with evidence-based decisions, so that they can start to integrate the new knowledge, the skills, and the practice to tackle those grand societal challenges. Application for us within and across the programs is key. So ensure that they can apply learning and development to work-based activities and assessments is key, so that we can develop and apply practice-based research approaches and develop and apply mastery in practice, both personally, professionally, and within the workplace. So that ultimately and throughout, they engage in co-creation. So they're engaging in social learning to co-create knowledge-based experiences. They co-create knowledge, meaning, and experiences within the learning community, and they're able to also co-create knowledge, meaning, and experiences within practice communities as well. So it's within and outside of the program, and that isn't mutually exclusive, and that can be built upon.
So how have we translated the pedagogical strategies and gamification elements to the learning structure of our virtual learning environment? And this is an overview of a weekly structure from week 4 of the Critical Leadership Perspective module, which is a module on the Strategic Leadership Programme. And you can see from this that we help learners to engage and interact with the academic content by using clear signposting, consistent structure across the module, and that's across all modules and all programs. So you can see that we're using the explore, challenge and apply gamification language and visual icons. We're very clear of how learning will be delivered. So we have that as guided online learning, scheduled synchronous sessions or work-based activities. And through these approaches, we're able to support learners in moving through those weekly learning challenges and in preparing for those synchronous sessions that typically happen at the end of the week. And I've created a short screencast to give you an idea of the look and feel of the weekly activities. So as you're watching this short screencast, you might notice that the tasks and activities are supported by clear guidance and instruction. We're using again that same language and visual icons. There's lots of questioning and prompts to help learners to explore and then challenge themselves within the learning environment. And we've also embedded lots of links and different types of digital resources. So hopefully from that video, you've been able to see how we've been able to translate the pedagogical strategies and the gamification elements to our virtual learning environment.
Thanks, Michelle. And just coming to evaluate the actual project and our design approach. The key in the project aim was to be collaborative, and we achieved that in a very inclusive, by working in a very inclusive way, but also in the design and the delivery of the learning in an inclusive and accessible way that we've created for the learners' experiences, but also really developing a strong program identity for both the learners and colleagues, not only academic colleagues, though the adjuncts and associates that might come and work with us, but also professional services staff, that we've created a really strong program identity for the team. It's also enabled us to and encourage us to really think about how we translate the learning objectives into the learning methods, tools, and the technology of what we might use. So really thinking about that design and how that might look and feel for the learner. It also has really acutely forced our attention to the value and the purpose of the interactive sessions. So we don't do any knowledge acquisition in any of the synchronous live sessions that we deliver, whether that be present in person in the future or online. That's saved for that co-creation and that added deep value and sense-making experience. As a result, we've had extremely high learner engagement. They've been immersed in an active learning experience that is genuinely flexible. In light of the fact that we have work-based learners, we are very accommodating in terms of the weekly screencast that Michelle showed you, that each week we understand and appreciate that learners have different demands on them. So we'll always create weekly time-sensitive activities from that they should focus their attention to, and they can go back and immerse themselves in other activities when it's appropriate and easy for them to do. Because of that development of psychological safety, the depth of the learning is much more meaningful and intense because we've spent that time creating that safe space for learners to share the experiences, their learning and their workplace. And it creates that meaningful online engagement, so that it isn't just within those synchronous live sessions that we have that engagement. That golden thread of engagement continues throughout the programme, whether we're physically present in an online space or in a classroom. That continues virtually, so that they can continue that journey of mastery of practice alongside. And there's just a few quotes there at the bottom of learner feedback that we've had so far, evidencing the challenge that's presented to the learners about how they think about leadership, particularly for the MSc in strategic leadership, but enjoying the mix and the variety of materials and media that we offer in the virtual learning space, and the support and the engagement of the learning environment for other learners in that space. And given the aim of the project, it was to be very collaborative and inclusive. It certainly, although Michelle and I are making this presentation today, it is by no means a two-person achievement. There are a lot of people involved. The Academic Learning Development and Organisation Futures team that I'm part of, and Michelle, and the wider Learning, Teaching and Development Service at Newcastle University, and other business school colleagues that have played a huge role in the development of these programmes. Thank you very much for listening.
And thank you very much indeed. Fascinating presentation there, Nicola and Michelle. Colleague, please do put some questions in the question bar, but whilst you're doing that, I just wanted to ask you a couple of things actually. I was really interested in the student response to it in terms of student satisfaction, as you might call it. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on that? You know, how well did students engage? Did you compare it with their engagement in other kinds of learning? Just out of interest, how it went down, because it seems really interactive, and you know, that must have made a difference, I would have thought.
Yeah, it really did, Lynn. I think one of the best quotes I've had from actually one of the learners is actually almost, they said, I'm so immersed in the learning experience, I almost forgot about the assessment. So that it's, which is lovely. Yeah. Until the assessment comes around. But yes, they still had to do the assessment. But it's not a tactical approach to learning that the learners have taken. They're fully immersed in the experience and the topics that we take them and the journey that we take them on. So all of the assessments, we take that pedagogical strategy of context, content and process, and that we draw those elements out in the assessments. There's always an element of creativity, what the learners might focus on in terms of the particular subject or topic within the module. But I think because we don't gift that to them, they are immersed in all of the topics, and they have to make that decision for themselves, but they enjoy it. And I think there's a little bit of with that social learning process that we engage them in, there's a little bit of, I suppose, peer pressure in some respects, gently, that chivies people along, keeps people on track, keeps that level of engagement, because if somebody has something to say that might be a little bit, controversial, I didn't agree with that, I don't know how that could be applied in my workplace context, that sparks an interest. And even if they haven't had time to look at that week, they go back.
Of course.
So
of course.
I think the social learning process has been a key driver of that engagement. So their satisfaction is a lot higher. It's not tactically driven.
Excellent, thank you. We've got a really interesting question from David Barnard, actually. Are action learning sets self-managed, or do you facilitate them, or do you use a mixture of self-management and facilitation? A good question.
Excellent question. Thanks, David. The action learning sets are facilitated. Interestingly, what we allow them to do is to be facilitated, and then we've come towards the end of this year, and they organically become. We have additional action learning sets that are self-managed. So we continue with a particular number of facilitated action learning sets throughout an academic year, but we don't limit that. And we've said to that, and they normally arrive at that because they're so, again, immersed, they're self-driven. So we've already had conversations with the learners actually just last week, thinking about, he said, well, we could do with more of these. And we said, well, what's stopping you? You know, we'll always have the same number, but that's very organic. We don't lay that expectation on them, but it does occur.
And a really good question. I'm not sure who's asked it at this point, but are there any ways of social learning that don't involve competition? Are all these things competitive, or are there other ways? We live in a competitive world, don't we? I guess, particularly in business.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always an element of competition and personalities that come in place. That's a good question. I suppose it's how it's set up. So, for example, some of the social learning processes that we have engaged with in some of the live sessions is something called a practice knowledge exchange session. So we get learners to work in groups. There is no assessment attached to it, but we ask them to design and co-facilitate a learning session based on a particular wicked issue, and get them to facilitate and share their experiences and elicit that from others. And we become, as the programme academic team, participants in that. So that helps a little bit, I think, with the hierarchy and that level of competition, that we, as the academic team, are involved in that co-creation, and we shift our position within that space. So I think that helps a little bit with that.
Excellent. And can you see opportunities for this approach? I mean, is that rolling out more widely across the school or the faculty? How is that? What kind of influence and impact is it having?
Yeah, well, Michelle and I were actually just talking before this presentation about how we could do that, because I do think it is transferable. I think it would be different, but I've certainly used this approach in a module, say, of about 200 undergraduate learners. And it might look and feel slightly different in terms of how that might be facilitated, but it certainly happened. I think particularly with the significant upskilling technologically in the last year, that has supported that shift and that scalability and transferability in, for example, a practice knowledge exchange session. There's no reason, with the size of our cohorts that we have on our programme, that could be rolled out as a seminar approach across a programme that is significantly larger than our programmes.
And I've got one more quick question for you. I'm sorry to cut you off, but Steve Wyatt is asking, how much time do the learners spend engaged on the course and social interaction each week on average? Obviously, he's not asking for precise details. So
this particular year, and the way that we've delivered this, on average, I would say, in terms of that live synchronous engagement where we're together in that space, it's 3 hours. We have not asynchronous sessions where we're engaging constantly in discussion boards. That happens most weeks, and then they have that guided level of directed study. That's usually about 6 hours on average for the week, with also some additional signposting to independent, and for them to obviously do their own research as well.
Okay, and I said it was my last question, but actually we've got another one just come up here that I will ask really quickly. And does the learner's immersion into the learning of the course using the gamification model, does it negatively impact on other courses using a different approach to learning, specifically in terms of time spent on each course? And that's coming from my piece. So it's about balancing, really, I think.
Yeah, and when you say course, do you mean the modules within the programme?
Yeah, I think it's about the modules,
Yeah. So I think the key for us is around that programme identity, and we it's really important to us that we work as a programme team, so that we have a holistic view across the programmes. We speak to each other actually across the programmes, but within the programmes. So I work really closely. I lead the MSc in strategic leadership. I'm constantly talking to my module leads so that we have a balance in terms of that the assessments, when things occur, how they occur, and actually how particular topics in particular modules, the flow of that's really important for us. So we're building on what across courses, if you like.
Thank you so much. We are running out of time. Huge thank you for all your, for your presentation, which was excellent. And thank you also, colleagues, for the really interesting questions.